Have you ever witnessed the moment when pride crumbles before necessity, when the dismissed becomes the savior? Today's narrative plunges into the sterile halls of St. Benedict Medical Center, where arrogance meets humility in a life-or-death dance that will challenge everything you believe about divine timing and the power of quiet faith. What happens when the one you've ignored holds the key to your survival? This story of a humble nurse and a brilliant surgeon will grip your heart and perhaps change how you see those gentle souls who serve without recognition. The scalpel trembled, just barely. Dr. Thomas Whitfield noticed it first in the reflection of the overhead surgical lights, that minute shake in his right hand that shouldn't exist. Not here, not now, not when Mrs. Patterson's beating heart lay exposed beneath his instruments, her life balanced on the edge of his expertise. He steadied his breathing behind the surgical mask, willing his hand to obey, but something deep within his nervous system had begun to betray him. "Suction," he commanded, his voice carrying its usual authority despite the cold sweat forming beneath his surgical cap. The operating room moved with choreographed precision around him, 7 medical professionals working in perfect synchronization, all except one. Nurse Rebecca Sterling stood at the instrument table, her blue eyes tracking something the others hadn't noticed yet. She'd been watching Dr. Whitfield for the past 3 surgeries, seeing what pride prevented others from acknowledging. The subtle stumbles, the momentary hesitations, the way he'd started gripping instruments just a fraction tighter than necessary. 23 years of nursing experience had taught her to read the invisible signs, the ones that whispered of trouble before it screamed. "Dr. Whitfield," she ventured quietly, stepping closer to his position. "Perhaps we should—" "Nurse Sterling," his voice cut through her words like the scalpel through tissue. "Your job is to pass instruments, not offer medical opinions. I've performed over 3,000 cardiac surgeries. I think I can manage without commentary from someone whose medical education consists of a 2-year nursing degree." The words hung in the sterile air like suspended particles of cruelty. Rebecca's cheeks flushed beneath her mask, but her eyes remained steady. She'd endured worse from better men, and pride, she'd learned, often spoke loudest before its fall. The small silver cross beneath her scrubs pressed cool against her skin, a reminder of humility's power and grace's persistence. "Of course, Doctor," she replied softly, returning to her position. But she didn't stop watching. The surgery proceeded with textbook precision for another 17 minutes. Dr. Whitfield's hands moved with their renowned skill, suturing the mitral valve with expertise that had earned him recognition across 3 continents. The tremor hadn't returned. Perhaps it had been nothing. Fatigue from the 14-hour surgery marathon he'd pulled yesterday, or too much caffeine, or simply a trick of the light. Then it happened. Mid-suture, his right hand seized completely, the needle driver clattering against the retractor with a metallic clang that shattered the room's rhythm. His left hand followed a second later, fingers curling involuntarily into a claw-like position. The partially sutured valve began to leak, blood welling up in the surgical field. "Dr. Whitfield!" Dr. Martinez, the assisting surgeon, reached for the instruments, but Thomas's body had begun to convulse, his tall frame swaying dangerously close to the patient. "Get him away from the table!" someone shouted. 2 orderlies rushed forward, catching the renowned surgeon as his legs buckled. His body went rigid, then began to shake violently. The surgical team erupted into controlled chaos, Dr. Martinez taking over the critical suturing while others attended to their collapsed colleague. Rebecca moved without hesitation, her trained hands supporting Dr. Whitfield's head as they lowered him to the floor. His eyes had rolled back, showing only white, and a foam of saliva had formed at the corners of his mouth. She checked his pulse, rapid and thready. His skin had taken on a greyish pallor that sent alarm racing through her nervous system. "He's seizing," Dr. Martinez called out, while maintaining focus on Mrs. Patterson. "Get him to OR 7, Page Neurology, stat!" As they lifted Dr. Whitfield onto a gurney, Rebecca noticed something the others had missed, a peculiar sweet smell on his breath, barely detectable through the surgical mask. Her mind raced through possibilities. Medical knowledge accumulated over decades of experience, clicking into place like tumblers in a lock. The emergency team wheeled him out at a run, Rebecca keeping pace alongside. In the corridor, away from the controlled environment of the OR, his seizure intensified. His back arched impossibly, muscles contracting with such force that she heard the pop of dislocating joints. "This isn't a standard seizure," she said to Dr. Harrison, the emergency physician who'd responded to the code. "Check his breath. There's a sweet smell." Dr. Harrison, a young resident barely 3 years out of medical school, dismissed her observation with a wave. "Nurse, we've got this. Standard seizure protocol. Ativan, 4 milligrams IV push." "Wait!" Rebecca began, but her words were lost in the flurry of activity. They administered the Ativan. The seizure didn't stop. If anything, it worsened. Dr. Whitfield's heart rate spiked to 180 beats per minute. His blood pressure plummeted. The cardiac monitor began showing irregular patterns that made Rebecca's blood run cold. "He's going into VTACH!" someone yelled. More drugs, more interventions. Nothing worked. The brilliant surgeon who'd saved thousands of lives was dying on a gurney in his own hospital, and modern medicine seemed powerless to stop it. Rebecca watched the growing panic in the medical team's eyes. Young doctors, who'd been trained to believe in the infallibility of protocols and procedures, were witnessing their failure in real time. She'd seen this before, not this exact scenario, but this moment when textbook knowledge crumbled against the complexity of the human body. 7 years ago, during a medical mission to Guatemala, she'd encountered something similar. A coffee plantation worker had been brought in with comparable symptoms: the seizures, the sweet breath, the progressive paralysis. The local doctors had been baffled until an elderly medicine woman had whispered a single word: cicuta, water hemlock, one of the most violently toxic plants in North America. But that was impossible. How could Dr. Whitfield have been exposed to water hemlock? The plant didn't grow anywhere near the hospital, and he certainly wasn't the type to forage for wild plants. Unless... "Dr. Harrison," she tried again, raising her voice above the chaos. "Please listen. The sweet smell, it could be cicutoxin poisoning, water hemlock. The symptoms match perfectly." The young doctor spun toward her, frustration evident even through his mask. "Nurse Sterling, that's absurd. Dr. Whitfield hasn't been wandering through wilderness areas eating random plants. Please step back and let us work." But even as he dismissed her, doubt flickered in his eyes. The standard treatments weren't working. Dr. Whitfield's vitals were crashing. They were losing him. Rebecca felt the familiar burn of being overlooked, dismissed, reduced to invisible despite her years of experience. How many times had she stood in rooms like this, holding crucial knowledge that ego prevented others from hearing? The cross against her chest seemed to pulse with warmth, and she remembered Pastor Michael's words from Sunday's sermon. Faith isn't always loud. Sometimes it whispers in the chaos, waiting for hearts humble enough to listen. She closed her eyes for a brief moment, a prayer flowing through her mind like water through cupped hands. "Lord, help them see, not for my vindication, but for his life. Make a way." When she opened her eyes, she found Dr. Angela Morrison, the senior emergency attending, staring at her. Dr. Morrison was different from the others, older, wiser, with the kind of humility that comes from decades of witnessing medicine's limitations. "Cicutoxin?" Dr. Morrison asked quietly. Rebecca nodded. "I saw it once before. Medical mission in Guatemala. The sweet breath, the violent seizures, the rapid progression. It's textbook cicutoxin poisoning. But the source would have to be recent, within the last hour or two." Dr. Morrison's mind was already working. He was in the physician's lounge before surgery, had lunch. Her eyes widened. "The new health initiative, the organic smoothie bar they installed last week. They've been advertising their wild foraged ingredients." The realization hit the room like a physical force. Several voices spoke at once. "Call the lounge. Get toxicology. We need activated charcoal." But Rebecca was already moving. "Activated charcoal won't work now. It's been too long, and he's seizing too violently to safely administer it. We need supportive care, but specifically we need to manage the seizures with barbiturates, not benzodiazepines. Phenobarbital, high dose, and prepare for potential rhabdomyolysis from the muscle breakdown. He'll need aggressive fluid resuscitation and alkalinization of the urine." Dr. Harrison started to protest, but Dr. Morrison cut him off. "Do it! Everything she said. Now." The room shifted into a different kind of motion, purposeful, directed. Rebecca found herself at the center of it, her quiet voice suddenly carrying the weight of authority she'd never claimed, but had always possessed. "Start with phenobarbital, 20 milligrams per kilogram loading dose," she instructed, her hands already moving to prepare the IV sites. "We need 2 large-bore IVs for fluid resuscitation. Normal saline initially, but be ready to switch to sodium bicarbonate. Monitor his CK levels every hour. If we see muscle breakdown, we could lose him to kidney failure, even if we stop the seizures." The medical team followed her lead without question now. Ego dissolved in the face of necessity. She guided them through each step, drawing on knowledge accumulated not from textbooks, but from years of watching, learning, seeing patterns others missed. As they pushed the phenobarbital, Dr. Whitfield's seizures began to subside. Not immediately. Cycutoxin didn't release its grip easily, but gradually, like a storm exhausting itself against a mountainside. His heart rate started to normalize. His blood pressure stabilized. "CK levels are through the roof," someone reported from the lab results. 8,000 and climbing. "Expected," Rebecca said calmly. "Start the bicarbonate drip. We need to keep his urine pH above 7.5. And someone needs to call the smoothie bar. Find out exactly what went into his drink. If they used water hemlock, thinking it was wild parsley or angelica, there could be other victims." Dr. Morrison was already on the phone. Within minutes, they had confirmation. The smoothie bar's new forager had mistakenly harvested water hemlock along with wild carrots, incorporating it into their forest floor blend. Dr. Whitfield had been the first customer of the morning, ordering a large size because he'd skipped breakfast. "They're shutting down immediately," Dr. Morrison reported. "Health department's on the way. Thank God he was the only one who ordered that blend today." Thank God. The words hung in the air with a weight that transcended their casual usage. Rebecca felt them resonate in her chest, where her cross lay hidden, but ever present. For 3 hours, they fought for Dr. Whitfield's life. Rebecca never left his side, monitoring every vital sign, adjusting treatments based on subtle changes others might have missed. She held his hand when the seizures returned, smaller ones now, manageable, and found herself praying silently, words flowing from a deep well of faith that had sustained her through 23 years of witnessing both miracles and tragedies. At hour 4, he opened his eyes. The room collectively exhaled. Dr. Whitfield's gaze was unfocused at first, pupils dilated from the massive amounts of medication, but gradually, awareness crept back. His eyes found Rebecca's face, and she saw in them something she'd never seen before: vulnerability. "Nurse? Sterling?" His voice was barely a whisper, raw from the intubation they'd had to perform when his breathing became compromised. "Try not to speak," she said gently, adjusting his oxygen mask. "You've been very sick. Water hemlock poisoning from the smoothie bar, but you're going to be okay." He stared at her for a long moment, and she could see his brilliant mind working despite the medication fog, piecing together fragments of memory. The tremor in the OR, the seizure, the darkness that followed, and somehow the quiet voice that had guided him back to light. "You knew," he managed. She nodded simply. "I've seen it before." They didn't listen. They did eventually. That's what matters. Our tears formed in his eyes, whether from physical pain or something deeper she couldn't tell. His hand, still weak from the ordeal, found hers and squeezed with what little strength he had. "I'm sorry," he whispered, for everything." Rebecca squeezed back, and in that moment years of dismissive comments and professional slights seemed to evaporate like mist before sunlight. "You're forgiven. You always were." Dr. Morrison approached, checking his pupils with a penlight. "You gave us quite a scare, Thomas. If Nurse Sterling hadn't recognized the sicutoxin poisoning, we'd have lost you. The standard seizure protocols were making things worse." Dr. Whitfield's eyes moved back to Rebecca, and she saw in them a complete transformation, the shattering of pride and the birth of something humbler, truer. He tried to speak again, but she shook her head. "Rest now. There will be time for words later." As the immediate crisis passed and Dr. Whitfield was moved to the ICU for monitoring, the story began to spread through St. Benedict Medical Center like wildfire. The brilliant surgeon who'd been saved by the nurse he'd dismissed. The quiet Christian woman who'd held the knowledge that million-dollar equipment and prestigious degrees had missed. The water hemlock that had nearly claimed one of medicine's brightest stars. But for Rebecca, sitting in the hospital chapel during her break 6 hours later, the story was both simpler and more profound. She held her small silver cross between her fingers, watching candlelight play across its surface, and thought about divine timing. How many small humiliations had led to this moment? How many times had she bitten her tongue, chosen patience over pride, trusted that her worth wasn't determined by others' recognition? "You were remarkable today." Dr. Morrison's voice came from behind her. The older physician settled into the pew beside her, both women sitting in comfortable silence for a moment. "I just did my job," Rebecca said quietly. "No." Dr. Morrison's voice was firm. "You did much more than that. You saved a man who'd spent years diminishing you. That takes a special kind of grace." Rebecca considered this, then shook her head slightly. "We all need saving sometimes. Today it was his turn. Tomorrow it might be mine. That's how mercy works. It doesn't keep score." Dr. Morrison studied her for a long moment. "In 30 years of medicine, I've rarely seen such clarity in crisis. Have you ever considered going back to school? Medical degree? You'd make an extraordinary physician." The offer hung between them like a door opening to a different life. Rebecca could see it, the respect, the recognition, the ability to have her voice heard without fighting for it. It was tempting in a way that surprised her. "Thank you," she said finally, "but I'm where I'm supposed to be. Sometimes the most important work happens in the shadows. Besides," a small smile played at her lips, "someone needs to keep watching, seeing what others miss." Dr. Morrison nodded slowly, understanding passing between them. "Well, I don't think Dr. Whitfield will be missing your observations anymore." As if to confirm this, Rebecca's phone buzzed with a text from the ICU. Dr. Whitfield was asking for her. She found him propped up in bed, IVs still running, monitors still beeping, but fully alert now. The room was filled with flowers and cards already. News of his near-death experience had shaken the entire hospital community. But his eyes were fixed on the door, waiting for her. "Nurse Sterling." His voice was stronger now, though still rough. "Please, sit down." She pulled a chair close to his bed, maintaining the professional distance that had always existed between them. But something fundamental had shifted in the space. "I need to tell you something," he began, then stopped, struggling with words in a way the articulate surgeon never had before. "I've been experiencing symptoms for 3 weeks, small tremors, momentary confusion. I thought it was exhaustion, or maybe early-onset Parkinson's. I was terrified." He laughed bitterly. The great Thomas Whitfield, facing his own mortality. Rebecca remained quiet, letting him find his way through the confession. "I became worse," he continued, "more dismissive, more arrogant, as if by asserting my superiority I could somehow prevent my own decline. And you—" He met her eyes directly. "You saw it. You've been watching me deteriorate, haven't you? She nodded gently. The signs were there, but I thought it was neurological too until today. The irony, he said, voice thick with emotion, is that what I thought was a degenerative disease was just poisoning. Apparently I've been drinking those damned smoothies every day for 3 weeks, getting small doses. Today's large serving just pushed me over the edge. He paused, swallowing hard. You saved me from more than death today. You saved me from months of terror, thinking I was losing my mind, my abilities. The tremors will stop completely once the toxin clears your system, Rebecca assured him. You'll be back to surgery within a month. Maybe less. No. The word came out sharp, decisive. Not back to the same surgery, not the same surgeon. He reached out, his hand steadier now, and she allowed him to take hers. I need to ask your forgiveness. Not just for today, but for 5 years of dismissal, condescension and professional disrespect. You deserved better. The entire nursing staff deserves better. Rebecca felt the weight of the moment, not just for herself, but for every nurse who'd been overlooked, every quiet voice drowned out by louder ones. Forgiveness isn't mine to withhold, she said softly. It was given long before you asked for it. His eyes glistened. Your faith. I've mocked it, haven't I? The little cross you wear, the way you pray before shifts. I called it superstition. You weren't the first, won't be the last. But you never responded with anger. Why? Rebecca considered the question, feeling for words that might bridge the gap between their worldviews. There's a verse I carry with me. In your hearts revere Christ as Lord. Always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you, to give the reason for the hope that you have. But do this with gentleness and respect. The gentleness isn't optional. It's not conditional on being heard or respected. It just is. Dr. Whitfield was quiet for a long moment, processing this. I used to think faith was weakness, a crutch for people who couldn't face reality. He gestured weakly at the medical equipment surrounding him. But today, while everyone with all their knowledge and technology was failing, you knew. How did you know? Experience, observation, and maybe, she paused, choosing her words carefully, maybe something more. Sometimes knowledge comes from unexpected places when we're quiet enough to receive it. The mission trip, Guatemala. You've mentioned it before, but I never asked. Tell me about it. So she did. As the afternoon light slanted through the ICU windows, Rebecca told him about the small clinic in the mountains, the coffee workers who came with mysterious ailments, the traditional healers who worked alongside modern medicine. She told him about the water hemlock victim, a young father who'd mistaken it for wild celery, and how an old medicine woman had recognized what university-trained doctors had missed. She taught me to look beyond the obvious, Rebecca explained, to see patterns in chaos, to trust accumulated wisdom, even when it doesn't come with credentials, and to always stay humble enough to learn. Humility, Dr. Whitfield repeated the word like he was tasting something foreign. Not exactly my strongest quality. It can be learned, Rebecca said with a small smile, usually through experiences we wouldn't choose for ourselves. A knock at the door interrupted them. Dr. Martinez entered, followed by several other surgeons and physicians. Word had spread about the role Rebecca had played in saving their colleague, and they'd come to thank her. But more than that, Dr. Whitfield could see in their faces. They'd come to learn. Nurse Sterling, Dr. Martinez began formally, we owe you an apology, all of us. We've created a culture where nursing expertise is undervalued, where years of experience are dismissed in favor of degrees and titles. Today showed us the potentially fatal flaw in that thinking. Others nodded, adding their own words of gratitude and promises of change. Rebecca accepted them graciously, but without fanfare, redirecting focus back to Dr. Whitfield's recovery and the systematic changes needed to prevent future poisonings. As the crowd dispersed, Dr. Whitfield asked her to stay a moment longer. I want to make this right. Not just words, but action. What would real change look like to you? Rebecca thought carefully. Weekly interdisciplinary rounds where nurses have equal voice. Formal recognition of nursing observations in critical decisions. And maybe mentorship programs where experienced nurses can share their accumulated wisdom without having to fight to be heard. Done, all of it. He paused, then added with a slight smile, on one condition. You help me lead it. Co-directors of a new integrated care initiative. Dr. Whitfield, Thomas, please. We nearly died on the same day. You from being silenced, me from actual poisoning. I think we can move past formalities. She laughed, a surprised, genuine sound that seemed to brighten the sterile room. All right, Thomas. But I have a condition too. You come to one of our medical mission trips. See medicine practiced where technology can't save you and humility isn't optional. Guatemala. Actually, we're going to Haiti in 3 months. Earthquake recovery work. Think you can handle it? He extended his hand, still weak but growing stronger. It's a deal. And as she shook his hand, Rebecca felt something shift in the hospital's atmosphere, subtle but real, like the first warm breeze of spring after a long winter. Change was coming to St. Benedict Medical Center, born from crisis but nurtured by grace. Over the following weeks, Dr. Whitfield's recovery became legendary within the hospital walls. Not just his physical recovery, which progressed remarkably well, but the transformation in his character. Nurses who'd previously scattered when he entered a room found him seeking their input. He instituted morning huddles where every team member's observation was valued equally. He even started arriving 30 minutes early to help with patient preparations, work he'd previously considered beneath his station. But for Rebecca, the most profound moment came 3 weeks later, when she found him in the chapel during a night shift. He wasn't praying, not exactly, but sitting quietly in the back row, staring at the simple wooden cross mounted on the wall. Couldn't sleep? She asked, settling beside him. Thinking, he replied, about randomness versus purpose, about how a misidentified plant nearly killed me but led to... He gestured vaguely at the space between them. This, whatever this is. Some would call it providence. And you, what do you call it? Rebecca considered the question, thinking of all the threads that had woven together, his illness, her knowledge, the collective humbling of an entire medical hierarchy. I call it grace. Undeserved, unexpected, but perfectly timed. I've been reading, he admitted quietly, about faith, about your faith specifically, trying to understand how you maintained such steadiness, such compassion despite years of professional dismissal. And I don't understand it, not intellectually, but I felt it when I was dying, when you held my hand. There was something there beyond medical training, something I've spent my career denying exists. They sat in comfortable silence, two professionals who'd found an unexpected friendship in the crucible of crisis. The chapel held them both, the believer and the questioner, with equal acceptance. The Haiti trip, he said suddenly. I've been preparing, not just medically. I've been reading about missionary medicine, about serving without resources, about healing being more than physical repair. It terrifies me. Good, Rebecca said simply. Terror keeps us humble, and humility keeps us capable of growth. Is that from Scripture? No, she smiled. That's from 23 years of nursing experience. He laughed, a sound that would have been impossible to imagine from the old Dr. Whitfield. You know, I've performed surgeries on presidents, celebrities, people who could buy this entire hospital. But I think my greatest achievement might be finally earning the respect of Rebecca Sterling. You always had my respect, she corrected gently. What you've earned is friendship. The word hung between them, profound in its simplicity. Friendship born not from similarity, but from crisis, not from agreement, but from mutual recognition of each other's humanity. A month later, when Dr. Whitfield returned to surgery, Rebecca was there, not as a subordinate nurse, but as an acknowledged partner in patient care. The surgery was complex, a triple bypass on a 72-year-old grandmother whose family filled the waiting room with prayers in 3 languages. As they prepared, Thomas caught Rebecca's eye across the operating table. "Any observations, Nurse Sterling?" he asked formally, but with warmth that transformed the question from condescension to genuine inquiry. "Your hands are steady," she observed. "No tremors. The toxin has completely cleared your system." "And?" She smiled behind her mask. "And Mrs. Chen's family has been praying in the chapel for 3 hours. Her granddaughter made me promise to tell you she's going to dance at her grandmother's 100th birthday party. Then we'd better not disappoint her." He paused, then added quietly enough that only Rebecca could hear, "Say one of your prayers for us." She nodded, and for just a moment before the first incision, the operating room held a different kind of silence, not just the absence of sound, but the presence of something greater. Then Thomas's hands moved with their renowned precision, steady and sure, guided by skill, but perhaps by something more. The surgery was flawless. Mrs. Chen would indeed dance at many more birthday parties. And in the recovery room, as her family surrounded her with tears of joy and prayers of thanksgiving, Thomas stood beside Rebecca, watching the reunion. "You were right," he said quietly, "about grace, about unexpected gifts coming from unexpected places." "We all carry different gifts," Rebecca replied. "Yours is in your hands, the ability to repair hearts. Mine is in watching, seeing what others miss. Neither is greater. Both are necessary. And faith, where does that fit?" She turned to look at him directly. "Faith is what reminds us that our gifts aren't really ours at all. They're given to us to give away. Every surgery you perform, every life you save. It's not about you. It's about something flowing through you. Once you understand that, the pressure lifts, the ego dissolves, and what remains is just service." Thomas absorbed this, watching Mrs. Chen's granddaughter show her grandmother the get-well cards made by her elementary school class. "The Haiti trip is in 3 weeks." "I know. I'm still terrified." "Good. Will you—" He hesitated, vulnerability still new to him. "Will you stay close? Help me navigate it?" "Of course. That's what friends do." As they left the recovery room together, other staff members watched with barely concealed amazement. The transformation of Dr. Thomas Whitfield had become hospital legend, but seeing him walk beside Rebecca Sterling as an equal, that was the true miracle. The proud surgeon and the humble nurse, finding in each other an unexpected reflection of what medicine could be when stripped of hierarchy and clothed in mutual respect. 3 weeks later, they stood together on Haitian soil, the earthquake-damaged clinic sprawling before them like a question mark against the landscape. Thomas looked at the limited supplies, the overwhelming need, the absence of every safety net he'd relied upon, and felt his hands begin to tremble, not from toxin this time, but from the weight of responsibility without resources. Rebecca placed a steady hand on his arm. "Remember what you learned in the chapel. We do what we can with what we have. The rest isn't up to us." He nodded, drawing strength from her calm presence, and together they walked into the clinic where hundreds waited for healing. Over the next week, Thomas discovered abilities he didn't know he possessed, diagnosing without machines, operating without ideal conditions, healing with presence as much as procedure. He watched Rebecca work with a grace that transcended training, saw how her faith manifested not in preaching, but in tireless service, in dignity given to the suffering, in hope offered without promise of outcome. On their last night, sitting outside the clinic under stars unmarred by city lights, Thomas finally asked the question that had been building since his poisoning. "Do you think everything happens for a reason? The water hemlock, my arrogance, your knowledge, was it all planned?" Rebecca looked up at the vast expanse of stars, each one a sun, each potentially warming worlds they'd never see. "I think we're given opportunities, disguised as crises. What we do with them, that's where choice meets providence. You could have recovered and returned to your old ways. I could have let bitterness silence my voice, but we both chose differently. Because of faith. Because of grace. Which sometimes looks like faith, sometimes like forgiveness, sometimes like a nurse knowing about an obscure poisoning at exactly the right moment. Thomas was quiet for a long time, processing years of certainty dissolved by weeks of wonder. "I want what you have," he finally admitted, "that steadiness, that peace despite chaos, that ability to see purpose in everything." "It's not mine to give," Rebecca said gently, "but it's available to anyone humble enough to ask for it." "Then I'm asking." Under the Haitian stars, far from the sterile halls of St. Benedict Medical Center, a brilliant surgeon learned to pray, not with perfect words or complete understanding, but with the raw honesty of someone who'd faced death and found himself wanting more than survival. Rebecca guided him through it, this first halting conversation with the divine, and when he finished, the silence that followed felt full rather than empty. "I don't feel different," he said, somewhat disappointed. "Transformation isn't always immediate. Sometimes it's so gradual you only notice it when you look back and realize you can no longer see who you used to be." 6 months later, that observation proved prophetic. The medical conference in Boston had invited Dr. Thomas Whitfield to present on innovative surgical techniques, expecting the usual technical brilliance and professional arrogance. Instead, they got a presentation on integrated care, on the wisdom of experienced nurses, on humility in medicine. He brought Rebecca with him, not as an assistant, but as co-presenter, and together they challenged 500 physicians to reconsider their assumptions about hierarchy in healthcare. "6 months ago," Thomas told the packed auditorium, "I nearly died from water hemlock poisoning. My life was saved not by the multiple degrees on my wall or the published papers bearing my name, but by a nurse whose observations I'd dismissed for 5 years. Nurse Rebecca Sterling saw what pride prevented me from seeing, knew what arrogance prevented me from knowing." He paused, meeting the eyes of physicians who wore expressions he recognized, the same skeptical superiority he'd once perfected. "How many of you have dismissed nursing input this week? How many valuable observations have you missed because they came from someone you considered beneath your consideration?" The room shifted uncomfortably. But Thomas continued, with Rebecca adding her voice, sharing not just the dramatic story of his poisoning, but the systematic changes they'd implemented at St. Benedict, the improved patient outcomes, the lives saved by truly integrated care. "Medicine without humility is just educated arrogance," Thomas concluded, "and arrogance, I learned the hard way, can be fatal." The presentation ended to uncertain applause, some enthusiastic, others reluctant. But in the weeks that followed, emails poured in from hospitals nationwide asking for guidance on implementing similar programs. The water hemlock poisoning that nearly killed Thomas Whitfield had planted seeds of change that would grow far beyond St. Benedict Medical Center. A year after the poisoning, on the anniversary of that terrifying day, Thomas found Rebecca in the hospital chapel again, but this time he wasn't questioning. He was there for the morning prayer service she'd been quietly attending for years. A handful of staff members gathered, nurses, orderlies, a few physicians, all finding a moment of peace before entering the chaos of healing. "Strange anniversary," he said to Rebecca as they left the chapel together. "The best anniversaries mark transformation, not just survival," she replied. "Then this is definitely the best. You know what I realized? That tremor in my hand during surgery, it wasn't just the toxin. It was my body rebelling against what I'd become. The poisoning was just the culmination." "Maybe," Rebecca said thoughtfully. "Or maybe it was grace disguised as catastrophe." They walked toward the surgical wing, where their first integrated team surgery of the day awaited. Mrs. Patterson was back, the patient whose surgery had been interrupted by Thomas's collapse. She'd specifically requested that both Dr. Whitfield and Nurse Sterling be present for her follow-up procedure. "I heard what happened that day," Mrs. Patterson said as they prepped her. "How you saved him." She looked at Rebecca, then turned to Thomas. "And how you've changed because of it. It's like God used my surgery to perform a different kind of heart operation. On you." Thomas smiled, the kind of genuine, humble smile that would have been foreign to his face a year ago. "I believe you're right, Mrs. Patterson, though Nurse Sterling would say God often works through unexpected channels." "Like water hemlock?" Mrs. Patterson asked with a small laugh. "Especially water hemlock," Rebecca confirmed, "though I wouldn't recommend it as a regular spiritual practice." As they wheeled Mrs. Patterson into surgery, Thomas caught Rebecca's arm gently. "Thank you," he said simply, "not just for saving my life, but for showing me how to truly live it." "Ah, you would have found your way eventually," Rebecca replied. "No," he said firmly, "some transformations require catastrophe, and some catastrophes are actually gifts wrapped in terrible paper." The operating room doors swung open, revealing the team assembled inside. Surgeons, nurses, technicians, all working as equals, all voices valued. It had taken a near-death experience to create this harmony, but now it hummed with life, with purpose, with the kind of grace that enters when ego exits. As Thomas took his position, his hands steady and sure, he glanced at Rebecca across the table. She nodded slightly, that same steady presence that had anchored him through crisis and transformation. Then, with movements that had become ritual, she led the team in a moment of silence before the first incision. Not everyone prayed, but everyone paused, acknowledging something greater than themselves at work in this space where life and death danced on knife's edge. The surgery proceeded flawlessly, each team member contributing their expertise, their observations valued and heard. And when Mrs. Patterson woke in recovery, when her family surrounded her with grateful tears, Thomas and Rebecca stood together in the observation window, watching love triumph over fear once again. "Next week's Haiti trip," Thomas mentioned casually. "I've recruited 3 more surgeons. They're terrified." "Good," Rebecca laughed. "Terror is the beginning of wisdom." "Is that scripture?" "No, that's the motto I'm putting on our new integrated medicine program brochure." They stood in comfortable silence, 2 professionals who'd found in crisis not just survival, but transformation, not just healing, but friendship, not just medicine, but meaning. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting long shadows that stretched like promises into tomorrow. Somewhere in the hospital, other transformations were beginning. Proud doctors learning humility, dismissed nurses finding voice, patients discovering that healing came not just from skill, but from the mysterious intersection of knowledge and grace. The water hemlock had done its work. Not the work of death it had intended, but the work of revelation it had unknowingly served. And in the sterile halls of St. Benedict Medical Center, where science and faith had learned to dance together, miracles disguised themselves as everyday moments of connection, compassion, and care. Thomas Whitfield had been saved by a nurse he'd ignored. But more than that, he'd been transformed by a grace he'd never believed in, working through a woman whose faith remained steady in chaos, whose knowledge transcended degrees, and whose humility had proved more powerful than all his pride. The scalpel no longer trembled in his hands, but his heart trembled daily with gratitude for the poisoning that had nearly killed him and the nurse who'd helped him find life on the other side of his own death. Some would call it irony. Others might call it coincidence. Rebecca Sterling called it exactly what it was: amazing grace, working through water hemlock and wounded pride to transform a brilliant surgeon into something far more valuable. A humble healer who'd learned that sometimes the ignored hold the keys to salvation, and that wisdom often whispers from the margins, while ego shouts from the center, deaf to its own destruction. As the sun set over St. Benedict Medical Center, painting the walls gold with dying light, the hospital hummed with its eternal rhythm of crisis and healing, despair and hope. But something had shifted in its frequency, a new note added to the symphony. The sound of hierarchy dissolving into harmony, of pride transforming into partnership, of near death becoming new life. And at the center of it all, a nurse and a surgeon continued their work, no longer separated by status, but united by something stronger. The recognition that healing required not just knowledge, but wisdom, not just skill, but humility, and not just medicine, but the kind of faith that sees providence in poison and grace in the most unexpected places.